On Sunday, July 23rd, the mayor of Manta, Agustin Intriago, and the soccer player Ariana Chancay were both victims of an attack, where unfortunately, the both of them lost their lives. What exactly does this mean for Manta? And what does it mean for all of Ecuador? Today, we're going to look at some of the more prevalent thoughts and opinions on what happened and the possible effects of what happened. I will also give you my reaction to those opinions and thoughts as someone who is and has been living in Ecuador for more than 10 years. And I will give you an idea of how all of this might affect someone looking to travel to, live in, or retire to Ecuador. And just a few heavy disclaimers before we begin. If you want to keep an unrealistic idea that Ecuador is perfect, then this isn't the video for you. If you think that preparing someone with accurate information of the reality of Ecuador is equivalent to fear-mongering, then this isn't the video for you. If you're here to compare and say that the situation in your country is worse, then this isn't the video for you. And as a final disclaimer, if anything were to happen to me, I am not the kind of person who would one day just think that there's no point in living. Keep that in mind and do with that information as you will as you listen to what I have to say in this video. Now, let's look at some of the more prevalent thoughts and opinions as to the reason why the mayor was killed and the repercussions that all of this may have. I am from Manta. It is assumed that he, referring to Agustin Intriago, was in talks to bring back the US base. Like most coastal cities with a port, Manta is a city of drug traffickers. Surely, this decision was not liked by these criminals. And yesterday, we saw what happened with the tragic incident of 2 deaths so far, including that of the mayor. He was very loved and prepared. Although it was his last term, he was projected to be the prefect of Manabí later on. I think that with good management, he could even have run for president of Ecuador in the not too distant future. Too bad these HDLGP, which is an acronym for Sons of you know what, murdered him. One of the most prevalent or popular opinions is this of the US base. And many of you may or may not know, but before in Ecuador, in the ports especially, there were actually US bases that when Rafael Correa took position of power, ended up removing in all of the country. So the general thought process is that after removing these bases, a lot of narcos or drug traffickers came into the country. And now, since there's the possibility of these bases coming back, a lot of the drug traffickers aren't happy with it, because of course they wouldn't be. These bases were set up to avoid drug trafficking in Ecuador. And now that they've been gone for so long, drug trafficking has become more prevalent. At least that's the opinion, that's the thought that everyone has on that situation. Adding to that, the fact that Agustin was considered a good mayor and was actually loved by many. There was the possibility of him, after his term was up, running for prefect and eventually running to be president of Ecuador, which for some people who don't like when a good president might eventually take power was obviously an inconvenience and another reason why he might have been killed. Another thought or opinion was that I heard that the reason was because the mayor was doing business with the choneros, who are a local cartel. People say that cartels operating in Manta from other countries were the ones that assassinated him. I don't know what the truth is, but things are ugly. If even politicians are dying, this thing is going to become Colombia in the 90s. This is basically the other side of the coin to the thought or opinion we just heard. And Basically, what it means is that the mayor, Agustin, could have been in talks with local cartel, trying to negotiate, which is apparently what a lot of politicians here do in order to soften the blow of crime in their cities or line their pockets. Really, I'm not one to say. But this is the other side, where there's the possibility that maybe Agustin was in talks with local cartel, which does exist here, and since the foreign cartel, people from other countries, of course, that are selling drugs here, don't like that, they sent someone out to get rid of their competition or the person promoting their competition because they want to be the dominant power here. The comment about the possibility of this being, the hit on the mayor, meaning trouble for everyone else, it's hard to really pin that kind of danger on people because look at how this happened, if this happened this way. If you were in talks with the cartel to have something drug-related happen, whether this be promote the selling of drugs for the safety of the population or line your pockets by allowing the selling of drugs, this doesn't affect a normal citizen. At least it shouldn't, in the sense that if the normal citizen is not out buying drugs, then why would these things affect him? If Agustin was really tied in with situation with drugs, then of course he's linked now to the cartels. So now he runs that risk. Well, he ran that risk. But if he never was, then of course it has nothing to do with him. And it's more than likely that a drug-related hit was not sent out on him if he was not in talks with them. But we'll look more into how this might affect travelers and expats a little bit later on. Now, the next three thoughts or opinions are very similar, so I'm going to read them at the same time. Disgusting government. How many times has it given its condolences and does nothing? The first one. Lasso can't control crime in the country at all. Complete failure. It's more dangerous than ever. That was the second one. And what do you want us to say? We are in the F because of state corruption and maybe even a military fight. I do not doubt that the murder was due to drug trafficking. That was the third one. As you could tell from these three thoughts or opinions, they're all related to the government, shifting the blame to the government in general. And it does make sense because just think about what recently happened in Ecuador, which is muerte cruzada, or mutual death. And mutual death was enacted in order to remove all the members of Congress who were supposedly impeding the president from being able to do anything. All the members of Congress are gone. So in theory, the president should be doing something about the situation with safety in the country. But this leads to a separate argument, which is basically the fact that even though now the president should be able to make decisions, and instantly at that, he still has to go through the congressional court. And now apparently the court is the one only approving certain things while denying the majority of others. That's the thought process, that's the whole conversation right now on that. What do we know about it? We know that some things have been approved, and we know that others haven't. Is it because the president isn't trying? Not sure. We'll talk about that in a bit. But for the most part, the population is very unhappy with the fact that the president should be doing something about this whole situation. But the president isn't doing anything about it. Seemingly isn't doing anything about it. And now the final thought or opinion, which is actually a reply to my question as to how Manta was doing and what the people felt at the moment and how this might affect them. We are all down. The mayor was very loved. Young, he represented us well. And I repeat, he was projected for bigger positions. We are tired of the same thing, or of the opportunists. It was interesting since, from what I know, he started as a counselor and he was going up in rank. Manta has been insecure for a while, but among all, it seems to me that the drug traffickers take care of the fact that this city is a transitory bridge for drugs. For this reason, the issue of vaccines, which are vacunas, which we'll talk about in a bit, is not heard as much as in Guayaquil. But the killings and robberies by foreigners, which is referring to the people coming from other countries to sell drugs and kill, are. Let's hope this does not bring about a turf war by not having Agustin anymore. So basically from this, and even aside from this, everything I've heard about Manta's mayor has been overwhelmingly positive. Young, a good person, had great plans, helped advance Manta a lot. And unfortunately, this happened. And from this, as well as other people who I've talked to throughout the years who live or have lived in Manta, Manta is insecure. It does have dangers. But the dangers aren't as bad as cities like Guayaquil. Like I've mentioned before, the situation with vaccines, which are vacunas, which is basically a sort of extortion where you tell someone who owns a business that they have to pay this much. If not, something's going to happen to them. It's not a common thing that you see in Manta because there is some kind of control, whether it be from the drug traffickers or from the government itself, but there is some control. But even then, people consider it to be insecure or unsafe. And the possibility of a turf war because of the cartels beginning without Agustin, it's really hard to say because I don't know how these cartels work, and I don't know if now that Agustin, who might have been a deterrent for these wars, is gone, if now there might be the chance for a turf war to happen. Now, this whole situation with the turf wars and the cartels leads back to the first opinion that we talked about and the situation with the US bases and the person who removed them. Because now there's talk that that person, Rafael Correa, was the person who sent someone to do something to Agustin. There's even messages on Twitter or X that show that there was a certain level of contempt against Mr. Agustin from ex-president Rafael Correa. And there's really no definitive proof, of course, but there is the theories, the talk behind everything that's happened that led Ecuador to where it is now. Just look at the situation with the US bases. If the US bases had still been here, would Ecuador have been safer? It's hard to say. I'll give my thoughts on that a little bit later on. But a lot of people are throwing speculation at that idea, while others, as you heard from the second opinion, think that Agustin may have had some talks with some cartels from here, which made him a likely target from foreign cartels. It's really hard to say, and I can't throw blame where I don't know. But I do have an opinion about all of this. So first, let's start with my opinion on the presidents, both Guillermo Lasso and Rafael Correa. And my thoughts on this are basically that it's very difficult to pin the blame on one president or the other president in any of their terms. Because I realize that being a president is not an easy job. I don't know if some people think it is, that presidents can make any decision and do anything that they want, but I personally don't see it that way. I don't see a world where a president can do whatever he wants and get away with it and just be like, okay. And if you think about the people who are in power, President Rafael Correa, who was in power, and President Guillermo Lasso, who is in power. For them to be in that position, someone had to put them there. And that someone was the population. That someone was the Ecuadorian population. And it's like my dad said, if you want something different, then you stop voting for the same thing. Rafael Correa was voted not once, but more than once into power. So people clearly wanted him there. Why did people want him there? Look back to the era before Rafael Correa, and things weren't perfect. Sure, everyone will tell you Ecuador wasn't a state controlled by drugs and drug trafficking, and that's true. But was Ecuador perfect? No, you can't expect any country to be perfect, and Ecuador definitely wasn't. Even when I got here, Ecuador was still filled with potholes. Ecuador still had bad streets, it had bad houses, bad foundations. Things weren't perfect, things weren't great. And no matter how long I've been here, as someone who's been here long enough to notice that, things have never been the greatest. I'm not saying they're terrible, and I know that some people come from countries where things may be worse or are worse. But that doesn't mean that Ecuador was great and that the president that came in was able to resolve everything. Rafael Correa constructed hospitals, schools, streets. But did he fix everything in the country? No. Is there a chance that he stole money from the country? He did. There's actually investigations about that. Did he bring in drugs? I don't know. It's kind of suspicious, the timing of the US bases going away and all of these drug-related problems escalating up until now, where it's almost impossible to stop. What can Guillermo Lasso do about it? It's hard to say. We all thought that with Muerte Cruzada, he would have done something. But as we've seen now, he's done some things while being unable to do others. Is it his fault? I don't know, because I don't know what the process is over there or what's limiting him. Because there's even talks that the people who are in the congressional court are allies of a certain political party, so they won't let Lasso do anything, and thus Lasso looks like he's doing things wrong, making him, in public view, for the public eye, making him look really bad. But is that his fault? If that is the case, you can't blame him, because he's trying and he's being held back. If that isn't the case, then, of course, it is his fault, but we don't know. And it's hard to blame or pin the blame on just one president for all of the things that are happening in the country. Now we talk about the narco. Now we talk about cartels and drugs and my opinion on those. I'm not a person who personally does drugs. I know people who do them. I know that they're legal in some parts of the world. I know that some of them are good and have medicinal purposes. But what happens in a country that has known peace without drugs when you start adding in drugs? And maybe it's not the problem of the drugs themselves. Once again, we have to look at how the situation is being administrated. Even in countries like the United States, we know that there's a situation with fentanyl, I think it's called. We know that in other parts of the world, I don't know what the name of the drug is, but I've seen people, and it might be the same fentanyl, there are people who look like zombies out on the streets. Is this innately the fault of all drugs? It can't be, because if that were the case, then in countries like the United States, where there's a lot of legalization, there would be a lot of people who are taking medicinal drugs who would be in a very poor situation. But hear that again, medicinal drugs. And I don't know how recreational drugs work in this situation, and if they're similar to medicinal drugs. But when used appropriately, there's no problem. It's like drinking. When you drink responsibly, there's no problem. When you drive under the influence, then we have a problem. When you do an excessive amount of drugs, when you do the bad kind of drugs, then it's a problem. as my dad always says, everything in excess is bad. And a lot of people are doing this in different parts of the world, maybe with the wrong kind of drugs, maybe with the medicinal kind, and it's becoming a problem. But here in Ecuador, this problem didn't exist to the level it is now. There were people who did drugs, but it was very, very much a thing that you'd have to go out and look for it. Now, I can go around and there will be parts of the city where I might just catch a whiff of something that does not smell like normal air or pollution from the cars. So you clearly know what it is, especially when your friends tell you, oh yeah, that's weed. What is the situation? What are my thoughts on drugs? I think that if you have correct regulation of drugs, if you administer them correctly, if they're taken responsibly, they shouldn't be a problem. But as with anything that is or becomes a vice, there comes a point where it's no longer controllable, where the population who can't afford it, because drugs, while they might not be expensive, at least they seem to not be if people can get them so easily, they are a thing that a lot of people have and then eventually end up depending on to escape their realities or escape their problems, then we have a situation. There's no correct control, there's no correct consumption, so people become addicted, monsters. They become things that they're not, and then it becomes a problem. Now, all this leads to my thoughts of how this will affect people here, or how it does affect people here. People looking to travel to Ecuador, people looking to live in, to retire to, people who are already living here in Ecuador. We have to look at this, not just what happened on Sunday, but also in general when these things happen. And the first thing that always comes to everyone's mind, foreigner or not, but especially to Ecuadorians, is fear. Fear of what could happen to them. Fear of what could happen to their family. Fear of what could happen to their business, to their daily lives. There's a lot of talk of fear. We heard it in one of the opinions that I mentioned earlier, where someone mentioned, imagine it happened to a mayor. You don't normally hear these things happen to mayors, to people of power here in Ecuador. So when you hear it happen to a mayor who has people guarding him, who normally is supposed to be in a safer position, people instantly think, how safe are they gonna be if the mayor got killed? All of this leads to, of course, how it affects them in their daily lives. And my dad talks about this all the time, because this goes hand in hand with how it affects businesses. When you're afraid of what could happen to you because of what happened to someone else, you go out less. And we're talking about an economy, which I think most economies work this way, that thrives on people going out and buying things, people spending money. My dad's restaurant, his business is a restaurant. If people don't go out and people don't go out to eat, he doesn't make money. Ever since this whole situation with the vaccines, we're talking about before what happened this Sunday to Mr. Mayor Agustin. The vaccines, las vacunas, people have been afraid to go out later than 8 or 9. People are afraid to keep their businesses open up until late. So the streets start becoming desolate. So people are making less money. I feel like the solution to that would be to open things earlier, but that's obviously not going to happen. At least I haven't seen it happen yet. People are afraid that their business is going to be vaccinated by these extortionists. I already have a friend. Her uncle owned an encebollado business, and he got vaccinated. He couldn't pay, so now he had to move away from where he lived. Because if he didn't, him and his family were at risk of something happening to them. And this isn't an isolated incident. This is something that has happened to many people, and not just in one city, various cities throughout the country, with the main ones being cities like Guayaquil or Quito. Bigger cities, bigger chances of that happening. People come from different countries where they experience different problems. People from the United States have the situation with mass shootings. There are countries where sex is a big issue in the sense that girls have less right than men, than boys, women less than men. Every country faces its problems, and I realize that. That's why I know it's very difficult, and I know for a traveler, it might not seem like a big deal, and you're not gonna run into these problems instantly as soon as you get here. You'd be very unlucky for it to happen, let me put it that way. Because I was in Quito, very touristic, in the area I was in, the Centro Histórico, and no one was afraid. There were so many people there that I was almost taken aback by how many people there were. Foreigners, just, I don't know if they were living there. I don't know if they were visiting. Some of them were because I did get to interview them. I don't see it being a problem, what happened to Agustin, or what has been happening to the country, because people don't seem affected by it. I don't want to say that they don't care, because I know people do their research before they come to Ecuador, and they see that there is danger. But I've made countless videos talking about, be careful, do this, don't do this, avoid having your phone. But I get the same questions, asking, should I do this? Should I not do this? What should I do? I see people still getting robbed, foreigners, their phones pickpocketed. But it's not the crime that you saw with Agustin. And I mentioned this earlier. Once you get involved with the cartels, that's when things actually start to happen to you, to your loved ones, to your life, because you're looking for it to happen to you and the people around you. There's a lot of things to look at here, but for people outside of the country, they don't see it as a big deal for one person. Maybe they do, but they don't see it as much of a big deal because they compare it to the mass shootings for someone to get killed in an assassination attempt. And sometimes that assassination attempt doesn't just take the life of one person. In this case, with Agustin, we lost both Mr. Agustin and Ariana Chancay, a soccer player. We lost 2 people in this shooting. And 2 people might not seem like a lot, but there are assassination attempts in places that you wouldn't expect them to be. Funeral homes, at the malls, at restaurants. And do you think that in those places, only those 2 people are there, and only those 2 people are affected? That only the person receiving the hit is affected? The assassination attempts can hit everyone who's there. And it does sometimes. And you just don't know when it's going to happen. And one of the reasons I feel, and I don't know how everyone else feels about this, but one of the reasons that I feel that people are so heavily affected and they become so fearful of this situation, of something like this happening or after it happens, is because how tightly knit the community in Ecuador is. There are people here, you can walk out on the street, and on one side of the street, you'll see someone whose last name is Zambrano, and on the other side, another person whose last name is Zambrano. Are they family? No. Could they be family? Maybe, because they could be cousins and they don't even know it. Family here, and how close people are to each other, how close you can go and find someone who you know. It's just crazy, like how close everyone and everything actually is, and how easy it is to find people that you know. So the fear is so high because when something happens in an area that you don't even live in, your cousin, your uncle, your grandma, someone that you know could be there and something could have happened to them. While in the States, maybe there's a lot more of a cold factor because, yes, it sucks that there was a mass shooting of 100+ people, but maybe it was someone you didn't even know. And I know there's people who have empathy and I'm glad that there are. I would feel terrible, no matter where it is, if I heard 100 people died. But to come here and downplay the death of 1 or 2 people because it's not as much as 100, and it's just crazy every time I hear that comparison. I understand it because, yeah, 100 lives versus 2, but it's just crazy how you can just sit there and think 2 lives, not a big deal. Over here we have 100. It's baffling sometimes, but I kind of do understand. Once again, I know that the importance of 100 people. And this linked to another reason why I feel that people become so afraid. And it's the fact that a lot of people, just looking at it this way, people who travel to visit, live in, retire to Ecuador, you come with the idea that it's safe, because that was Ecuador. It was a lot safer before than it is now. You come with that idea. You're not wrong in thinking that it was that way. So imagine how people who actually live here feel when they notice that the country that was once safe, with the exception of the petty crimes, isn't safe anymore. It's a terrible feeling if you think about it that way. And it's understandable that people would feel fear because they're not used to it. They have no way to defend themselves from it because the police don't do anything about it. They don't have guns to do anything about it. And thankfully they don't, because then there would be other types of problems. But people feel unsafe because they can't do anything about it, and no one will do anything about it, and the government keeps things the same. It's really frustrating for people living here. As much as it is scary, it's frustrating. Because no one wants to live through this. I know no one wants to live through this anywhere else in the world. But here in Ecuador, for people living here, and since we are talking about Ecuador, no one wants to live through this. No one wants to hear that their mayor, their super kind, amazing, with a future mayor, just passed away. And now no one knows who's going to take his place. Because that's another fear of the people for anyone living in Manta. Who's going to take the place of this mayor, and what kind of person are they going to be? As one of the comments said, they're tired of opportunists. People who they want to fill the role of mayor so that they get their money and they do nothing for the city. They promise false things that they never come through with. What's the point of a person like that? It's so frustrating. Like living here and feeling like there's nothing you can do and there's no solution to the things that are happening. And a person who's coming to travel to, retire to, live in Ecuador, at least the people who are traveling here, they're not going to see it. Like I said, I was in Quito. Everyone seemed to be having a great time. I don't see people who are retired here even witness to these problems, but because they're smart about it and they don't get involved with cartels. Because you don't have to worry about these problems if you're not involved with cartels. You do have to worry about petty crime. That's why I have do's and don'ts videos, trying to help you avoid what could happen with petty crime, which is frequent. But why is the frequency of petty crime so high? Because people want money. Because people want money not for their livelihood. Because I don't hear about the criminals who steal to have a better life. The majority of crime is because people want drug money, because people want to get high. And I know there will be people who steal with a good intention, but stealing no matter what is bad. If you want to change your life, you get up and you do something about it. And for people here who are tired of the president who does nothing, or the presidents who do nothing, or the people who they vote into power and do nothing, stop voting for these people. If you want things to change, vote for someone else. Because you have that choice. But you're clearly not taking it if the same people who come into power are the same people who do nothing. And I don't want to throw all the blame to the president, because how do you change something that is so in the system that if you try to change it, you could be the next victim. Just look at what possibly happened to Agustin. Supposedly, he tried to change things, tried to get the US based. It's actually something that's supposedly all around the country trying to happen, and now he's dead. Look at how people who try to talk about the situation. I was having a conversation with a friend who said, if anything happens to her, you already know. She even looked up sources for me to talk about this, and the stuff that she saw before has been taken down by the person because that person knows or has already been threatened to stop talking about these things because they're gonna get in trouble. So how do you change things when every time you try to change things, the system is so corrupt that something could happen to you? I've said it many times before. For the people who want me to be some kind of political figure, first of all, I'm no good at politics. I understand what's happening and how bad it is, but I can't go into a political setting and say that I'd be the right person for this. Because one, if I were the right person for this, I probably wouldn't last very long. And two, if I tried to go into it, I would have to become the person that I hate in order for things to actually work and for me to survive. Because that's just the only way. And like I've talked about before with my dad, with many people who I've talked about with this situation, the only way things are going to change in this country, the only way the country is going to get better, the only way we're going to see a stop to all of these bad things happening is if you eliminate the root of the problem. You have to literally topple the whole government and start from zero if you want things to change. Because while we leave the same people who are corrupt, while we have the same people who already have ties to corruption in positions of power, nothing's going to change.